Hey everyone, welcome back to the Thylacine Studios podcast. Last month, I released patch 0.4.0 for Siralim Ultimate. This massive patch includes nearly 1,700 achievements, a new type of currency that can be spent at a new shop offered by the Gambling Dwarves, a loot display filter, tons of new prophecies, quality of life improvements, and much more. The patch also includes a balance pass on all the traits, spells, relics, perks, and status effects in the game. In total, the patch notes were around 400 lines long, which is one of the biggest patches I think I've ever released for the Siralim series. The next patch will be a little bit more focused. I've already implemented most of your suggestions in the previous patch, and all the most time-consuming things are done now. The codex, tutorial messages, and achievements are by far the most time-consuming things to add to the game, especially compared to how impactful they are in terms of overall content. So now I can finally focus on adding some real content to the game. That's what I want to spend the rest of this episode talking about. The highlight of our next patch includes Nether Bosses, and here's how they'll work. After you finish your main story quests, that is, after you've defeated the boss at depth 63, every 5 realms you visit, you'll be guaranteed to receive a realm quest that asks you to defeat a Nether boss. To do so, you'll need to find a portal in that realm that will take you to the boss's chambers. Many of the Nether bosses you'll encounter are remixed versions of the story bosses you've already fought in Siralim Ultimate, while others will come from Siralim 2 and 3. You'll definitely see some familiar faces in the mix from previous games. For example, Shackler was a fan favorite boss from Siralim 2, and everyone agrees that he is the most well-designed boss in the series and provides countless hours of fun on his own. So I wanted to bring him back for one final round in Siralim Ultimate. In total, there will be 35 different Nether bosses for you to encounter. They won't be chosen randomly. You'll fight each one in a certain order until you've killed all 35, and then you'll be asked to fight the first one all over again. So because you're only able to fight one every 5 realms, you'll need to fight your way through 175 realms just to see them all. But it doesn't end there. Each time you refight a boss, its trait will grow more powerful, up to a maximum of 3 times. And these aren't just going to be numerical increases. Each trait is going to get something added to it. For example, and I'm just making this up for the sake of demonstration, imagine you fight Kichi for the first time. Her trait might be enemies always have bleed. The next time you fight her, her trait might read enemies always have bleed, enemies take damage from bleed twice. And then the third time you fight her, her trait might read enemies always have bleed, enemies take damage from bleed twice, enemies' bleed damage is based on their highest stat rather than their current health. So the point is that each time you refight another boss, a new challenge or sometimes a new mechanic will be added to the mix to keep things interesting. So as I mentioned earlier, it'll take 175 realms to encounter each boss, but since there are 3 tiers for each boss, it'll actually take 525 realms to truly see everything there is to see with this system. As far as rewards go, after you defeat your first Nether boss, which is probably going to be Kichi, you'll receive a new decoration for your castle. Actually, it's an NPC. And this NPC will serve as a new shop where you can buy legendary crafting materials for your artifacts. After you defeat another boss, a new material will be added to the shop. And each consecutive time you defeat the same boss, a new material will be added. So in other words, each Nether boss has a total of 3 materials for you to unlock in this shop. Since there are 35 Nether bosses, that means you can unlock up to 105 new legendary crafting materials. But that's not all. If you recall, we unlocked creature skins as a Kickstarter stretch goal. I'm going to add those to the next patch as well. All the story bosses and Nether bosses will have a unique skin, and after you defeat the Nether boss enough times, you'll be able to purchase their skin from the Nether shop. Of course, there will also be tons of other skins for you to unlock outside of Nether bosses. It's pretty simple how it works, really. Sometimes, while traveling through a realm, an enemy might have a skin equipped to it, and it'll look different than a normal creature. When you encounter one of these enemies, an animation will play over it to show you that this isn't just a normal creature. After you kill it, you'll unlock that skin, and then you can equip your creatures with that skin whenever you want. There's no limited number of uses for these. The only restriction for skins is that they can only be equipped to a creature that belongs to that skin's race. For example, if you unlock a skin for the familiar race, you can't equip it to one of your fiends, but you can equip it to any creature that is a familiar. One more thing I wanted to mention about Nether Bosses. They will drop keys that can be used to challenge the gods at the Gate of the Gods. Now, I'm not actually going to implement the Gate of the Gods in the next patch, but you'll still be able to earn these keys for now. The higher your realm instability, the more keys you'll earn. That way, players will have an incentive to crank up their realm instability. Otherwise, you'd probably just turn it to 0 when you knew you'd be fighting another boss. If you don't know what the Gate of the Gods is, don't worry about it for now. You'll learn more about that soon enough in a future episode. Oh, and if you've been playing Siralim Ultimate for a long time, you're probably well past Realm Depth 63 by now, which is when I said that these encounters would begin. It would be really boring for you if you're able to take on enemies at realm depth, 1000 right now, but then your first Nether boss starts at depth 70. So to alleviate that issue, you'll simply start encountering Nether bosses every 5 realms, starting at your highest ever depth. For example, if your highest depth is 1002 after the patch is released, you'll encounter your first Nether boss at depth 1005, then another at 1010, and so on. I've just kind of rounded it to the nearest 5. I also have an idea in mind to make some content a little more difficult. It's not really some mind-blowing idea that will totally change the game, but I want to start experimenting with giving hard enemies like Nether bosses more health. It's not really fun if you can enter a battle and wipe out an enemy in one hit, thereby allowing you to ignore their trait entirely. So I'm going to try to give Nether bosses enough health that you're probably going to need to endure a few hits from your enemies and actively try to counter their traits. I can extend this idea to all future content as well, such as the creature masters, world bosses, god fights, and things like that. I don't want to add this to every enemy because I don't want battles to take an extended amount of time, but for boss fights, I think this is pretty important. I would also like to go back and revisit the story bosses and adjust their health accordingly to make the difficulty curve a bit more smooth. Right now, one boss might be really hard, and then the next 3 bosses you fight are really easy. So if I go back and I adjust the health of each boss, I think that'll kind of make the whole story a little bit more smooth, and you won't have as many issues and walls that you run into while you're progressing. Now, I know this health thing sounds like a simple change, but if I simply increase enemies' health and leave it at that, certain traits and other effects will be extremely overpowered. Most players know that they could just use the bleed debuff and pretty much ignore this health increase. So, before I release this change, I need to go through all traits, spells, perks, and other effects to make them work with a creature's health before it's adjusted with this new difficulty system. That'll take some serious work, so this is a surprisingly big change, but I think it'll make the game a lot better in the long run. As you can imagine, all the things I've mentioned in this episode will take a lot of time to implement. After all, I have over 200 traits to implement for Nether bosses and their corresponding material rewards, and adding skins won't be an easy task by any means either. But I've also been hard at work on this patch for the last 3 weeks. So right now, I'm hoping to have this patch released by late October, hopefully in just another 2 weeks from now. But of course, it's always hard to estimate things like this, so don't take that as a definite release window. Much like with the last major patch, I'll probably have this one up on the test branch before it's fully released. So that's it for this episode, and I will see you guys next time.